Dear friends, welcome to yet another installment of Strategic Power. In this video, we will see Putin, in a prominent speech, warns the West about intervention in Ukraine. Combining geopolitics and nationalism, he seeks to negotiate while remaining firm. He warns about the Baltic republics and leaves the question, what will the outcome be? Before we begin, in case you have not already done so, please consider subscribing and enabling notifications to stay up to date on new videos. The Russian President Vladimir Putin declared this Thursday that Western countries are running the risk of unleashing a nuclear war if they send troops to aid Ukraine. This statement marks one of Putin's most direct and precise speeches since the beginning of the conflict with the Ukrainians. Putin emphasized that a possible Western military intervention in support of Ukraine would be reckless and would have global repercussions, including involving nuclear weapons. Putin stated, "All the measures that the Western countries are considering, with which they are threatening the world, represent a real threat of a conflict with the use of nuclear weapons and therefore the annihilation of civilization." Although he has already warned about the dangers of a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, this specific warning about nuclear weapons is one of the most explicit so far. He also stressed that the military presence of NATO in Ukraine could result in tragic consequences for the intervening countries, making a historical allusion to the results of previous interventions in Russian territory. Several European leaders of NATO member countries expressed concern about Putin's statements. The German Chancellor expressed NATO's desire to avoid direct involvement in the regional conflict. In a statement, he emphasized that NATO does not plan a military intervention in the region. NATO will not participate in this conflict. That remains our position. We do not want the war between Russia and Ukraine to turn into a conflict between Russia and NATO. All our allies agree. That also means Germany will not get involved in the region, the Chancellor said. Although Moscow is open to discussions on nuclear strategic stability with the United States, it suggests that Washington has no genuine interest in such negotiations. This statement by Vladimir Putin, lasting approximately 2 hours, comes after the French president pointed to the possibility that Western countries would send troops to Ukraine as a way to support it at this delicate moment. This moment marks one of the most challenging periods in Putin's statements, especially considering the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, which has already been going on for more than 2 years. Putin was extremely incisive, revealing the firmness of the Russian position, but the most critical point was the direct warning made to the West, warning NATO countries not to venture into a direct intervention in the Ukrainian conflict, including sending military troops to Ukrainian territory. By mentioning the possibility of a broader conflict, potentially involving nuclear weapons, he used terms like destruction of civilization, demonstrating his determination. It is clear that nuclear weapons function as a deterrent instrument intended to deter other actors from attacking its territory or using weapons against its country. That is the underlying logic of nuclear armaments. It is a means of deterrence. He employed that rhetoric with the aim of deterring Western actors from getting involved in any way in the Ukrainian conflict that is already underway for more than 2 years. His harsh and firm tone can be interpreted as a response to the inconsistent, worrying, and irresponsible statements made by Macron. The French president's speech only served to further inflame the war scenario in a context where there is no foreseeable outcome or any prospect of reconciliation or balance. Russia is benefiting from that scenario, with Ukraine weakened and its troops facing ammunition shortages. The recent conquest of Bakhmut, a strategic city in the Donetsk region, is a clear example of the position of strength that Russia is demonstrating. Putin is taking advantage of this favorable situation to reinforce his position and demonstrate power. It is also interesting to observe the contrast in the interactions between Putin and the US president. While the US president used insulting language in relation to Putin during a campaign event, Putin adopts a more ironic tone when referring to Joe Biden. He even goes so far as to express a preference for Biden over Donald Trump in the elections, and in his speech, although he maintains a rigid stance, he leaves implicit that he would be willing to negotiate with the United States. Unlike the US government, which often treats him as an implacable rival, Putin adopts a more diplomatic approach in relation to the United States. Putin has been in power for more than 2 decades, having assumed leadership of the Russian government in late 1999, That long-period provid is a clear view of the foreign policy he seeks for his country. In the relationship with the United States, there is what is often called limited divergence, which means that Russia allows itself to disagree and confront the United States on various issues, but in a controlled and moderate way, without seeking to create insurmountable crises or direct conflicts. A war with the United States or NATO clearly does not interest Russia. When Putin stated that he preferred Biden to Trump, he mentioned that Biden is a more traditional, predictable politician from the old guard. Although there was a dose of irony in that statement, there is some basis to it. Trump is known for his unpredictability, while Biden is seen as a more weakened figure, both physically and in terms of popularity, which can make him more malleable for Putin. Moscow's stance is marked by that delicate balance, demonstrating firmness without exposing vulnerabilities, avoiding irreparable crises. Although Moscow expresses willingness to dialogue with the West, especially with the United States, they argue that they are not the ones interested in such a dialogue. Putin, to some extent, blames the West, mainly the United States, for the current state of relations. He recognizes the need to resolve the conflict in Ukraine, repeatedly stating that it was not Russia that caused the situation, and that it is fighting what he describes as the Nazism present in the Ukrainian government. Nevertheless, Putin leaves the door open for dialogue with the United States, but on terms that also meet Russian interests. A crucial point of the speech was when Putin stated that Russia will not negotiate solely on the terms that interest others. This denotes a demonstration of strength and a firm position, but at the same time leaves the door ajar for possible future negotiations. Russia seeks to sit at the negotiating table, however, maintaining a position of strength and not presenting itself as vulnerable from the outset. Putin's foreign policy is strongly based on a geopolitical and nationalist view, which has been a constant over the past 2 decades. He is constantly vigilant in relation to any country that may represent a strategic vulnerability for Russia. A clear example of this are the 3 Baltic republics, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. These countries were part of the former Soviet Union and are currently members of the European Union and NATO, located in the Baltic Sea region. Putin closely monitors these countries due to their geographic proximity and the fact that they are integrated into Western political military blocs, which can be perceived as a potential threat to Russian security. With the recent accession of Finland and now the conclusion of Sweden's entry into NATO, practically the entire Baltic Sea area, except for the Russian coastal regions such as St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad, is under NATO's influence. Therefore, Russia clearly perceives this NATO advance, with the accession of Sweden and Finland, as a mobilization that restricts its positions in the Baltic Sea, a crucial area for trade. This generates concerns for Russian interests in that region. The presence of ethnic Russians in territories such as the Baltic republics and eastern Ukraine contributes to the Russian perception that their national security is at risk, justifying their territorial interventions in those areas. The situation in Transnistria is delicate due to the presence of pro-Russian rebels, representing a potential threat to the territorial integrity of Moldova. Russia also maintains intense surveillance over countries like Georgia, with which it came into conflict in 2008 due to the presence of ethnic Russians and concern with NATO expansion. Belarus's clear support for Russian policies in the region, along with Russian interest in issues in Moldova, Transnistria and Georgia, suggests a continued strategy of protecting Russian interests and regional influence. Although it is difficult to foresee the future, it is possible to consider that Russia could aspire to annex the Baltic republics to its territory, including Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave on the coast of the Baltic Sea. The geopolitical complexities of the region show Russia's constant tensions in protecting what it considers to be its vital space and ethnic citizens, as expressed by Putin.